The volcanic ash crunched beneath Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson's boots as he surveyed the black beaches of Iwo Jima through his binoculars. It was February 19th, 1945, and the morning sun cast long shadows across what the Japanese called Sulphur Island. From his position aboard the USS El Dorado, Johnson could see the ominous silhouette of Mount Suribachi rising 554 feet above the landing zones, its dormant crater serving as a natural fortress for the enemy. The island stretched before them like a pork chop, 8 square miles of volcanic rock, sulfur springs, and carefully constructed death traps. For 72 consecutive days, American bombers had pounded Iwo Jima with more ordnance than had been dropped on some entire Pacific campaigns. Yet as Johnson watched the final preparatory bombardment, he knew the real hell was just beginning. Major General Harry Schmidt, commanding the 5th Amphibious Corps, had warned his division commanders that this would be unlike any previous Pacific assault. Intelligence reports indicated that Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the Japanese commander, had abandoned the traditional beach defense strategy that had failed so catastrophically on other islands. Instead, he had transformed Iwo Jima into a subterranean maze of interconnected tunnels, bunkers, and artillery positions, a fortress designed not to repel invasion, but to exact the highest possible price in American blood. The strategic importance of this sulfuric wasteland could not be overstated. Located 660 miles south of Tokyo, Iwo Jima served as an early warning station for Japanese homeland defense and a base for fighter aircraft that harassed American B-29 Superfortress bombers on their raids against Japan. More critically, capturing the island would provide the United States with emergency landing fields for damaged bombers returning from missions over the Japanese mainland. As referenced in contemporary military reports from the Pacific Theater Archives, Kuribayashi had spent 8 months preparing his defenses with methodical precision. The Japanese had constructed over 11 miles of tunnels, connecting more than 1,500 defensive positions. Every cave had multiple entrances and exits. Every bunker was reinforced with steel and concrete. Every position was designed to provide interlocking fields of fire that would turn the beaches into killing fields. At 0900 hours, the first wave of landing craft approached the southeastern beaches. The 4th Marine Division would assault the right flank near the base of Mount Suribachi, while the 5th Marine Division took the left. The 3rd Marine Division remained in reserve, though Johnson suspected they would be needed before the day was out. Colonel Harry Liversedge, commanding the 28th Marines, had been assigned the seemingly impossible task of isolating and capturing Mount Suribachi. His men understood the mountain's significance. From its heights, Japanese observers could direct artillery fire across the entire island. Until Suribachi fell, no American position would be safe from the enemy's watchful eyes. The landing craft ground against the volcanic sand with a grinding scrape that seemed to announce their arrival to every Japanese defender on the island. Marines poured over the sides, their boots sinking into the loose black sand that made every step an effort. For the first few minutes, an eerie silence hung over the beaches. Some optimistic souls wondered if the preliminary bombardment had been more effective than anticipated. Then the island erupted in fire and fury, and the Battle of Iwo Jima began in earnest. The silence shattered like glass as Japanese mortars and artillery opened fire simultaneously from concealed positions. Across the island, Marines who had been advancing cautiously across the loose volcanic sand suddenly found themselves trapped in a nightmare of exploding shells and machine gun fire. The black beach sand, which had seemed merely difficult to traverse moments before, now became a deadly trap that absorbed the impact of bodies and muffled the screams of the wounded. Sergeant John Basilone of the 1st Battalion, 27th Marines, had survived Guadalcanal and the Northern Solomons, but nothing had prepared him for this mechanized slaughter. As he led his machine gun section forward, Japanese artillery bracketed his position with terrifying accuracy. The enemy had pre-registered every yard of the beach, turning the landing zones into a carefully orchestrated killing field. Within the first hour, casualties mounted at an alarming rate. Hospital Corpsman John Bradley found himself crawling from Marine to Marine, applying pressure bandages and morphine while Japanese snipers fired from spider holes camouflaged in the volcanic rock. The traditional core doctrine of rapid inland advance had been rendered obsolete by Kuribayashi's defensive strategy. Every 100 yards gained cost dozens of American lives. Colonel Harry Liversedge's 28th Marines faced perhaps the most daunting task of the day. Mount Suribachi loomed above them like a medieval castle, its slopes honeycombed with caves and bunkers from which Japanese defenders poured devastating fire down upon the advancing Americans. The mountain's defenders had prepared overlapping fields of fire that created interlocking zones of death. Every approach route had been carefully planned and pre-sighted by Japanese gunners. By noon, the situation had deteriorated beyond the worst-case scenarios planned by American commanders. The loose volcanic sand made movement difficult and exhausting, while Japanese defenders remained hidden in their underground positions, emerging only to fire and then disappearing back into their subterranean warren. Traditional naval gunfire support proved largely ineffective against targets that could not be seen or accurately located. Major General Clifton Cates, commanding the 4th Marine Division, realized that conventional assault tactics would have to be abandoned. His Marines were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they could barely see, let alone engage effectively. Radio communications crackled with desperate requests for tank support, flamethrower teams, and additional ammunition, as units found themselves pinned down within sight of their landing zones. The Japanese defensive system revealed its diabolical effectiveness as the day progressed. Kuribayashi had positioned his strongest defenses not on the beaches where they could be destroyed by naval bombardment, but inland where they could inflict maximum casualties on advancing forces. Machine gun nests were positioned to provide mutual support, while mortar teams operated from positions that could rain fire down on any American advance. According to wartime correspondence later found in Japanese archives, Kuribayashi had issued specific orders that every man should kill 10 Americans before dying. His defensive positions had been constructed with this philosophy in mind, not to hold territory, but to exact the highest possible price in American blood for every yard gained. As night fell on February 19th, the Marines had established precarious footholds on the beaches, but at a terrible cost. More than 2,000 casualties had been sustained in the first day alone, a rate of loss that shocked even veteran Pacific commanders. The black sand was stained with American blood, and the wounded cried out in the darkness while Japanese infiltrators attempted to penetrate American perimeters. In the command post aboard the USS El Dorado, Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner reviewed the casualty reports with growing concern. The intelligence estimates had proven woefully inadequate. Iwo Jima would not fall in 3 days as originally planned. This would be a battle of attrition that would test American resolve to its limits. Dawn on February 20th brought no relief to the Marines clinging to their hard-won positions on Iwo Jima's hellish beaches. Mount Suribachi continued to dominate the battlefield like a malevolent giant, its slopes bristling with hidden guns that could strike any American position on the southern half of the island. Colonel Harry Liversedge knew that his 28th Marines would have to take the mountain before any significant progress could be made elsewhere on the island. The assault on Suribachi began with a carefully coordinated attack that combined naval gunfire, artillery, and close air support. Marine Corsair fighters dove repeatedly at the mountain's face, dropping napalm and 500-pound bombs into suspected cave entrances. Yet even as the mountain disappeared beneath clouds of smoke and flame, Japanese defenders continued to emerge from concealed positions to pour fire down upon the advancing Marines. Private First Class Ira Hayes of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines found himself part of a desperate advance up the mountain's northeastern face. The loose volcanic rock made footing treacherous, while Japanese defenders rolled grenades down the slopes and fired from positions that seemed impossible to locate. Hayes had grown up on the Gila River Indian Reservation in Arizona, but nothing in his desert homeland compared to this landscape of sulfur and death. Sergeant Michael Strank led his squad through a maze of shell craters and rocky outcroppings, using Bangalore torpedoes to clear Japanese positions one by one. The mountain's defenders had constructed an elaborate system of mutually supporting bunkers, each position carefully sited to cover the approaches to others. Destroying one bunker often revealed 2 more, their firing ports concealed by clever camouflage and natural rock formations. The flamethrower teams proved most effective against the mountain's defenders, though at terrible cost to themselves. Private First Class. Robert Leader carried his weapon up impossible slopes, spraying liquid fire into cave entrances while Japanese soldiers fired back from the darkness within. The psychological effect of the flamethrowers was as devastating as their physical impact. Few Japanese soldiers could maintain their positions when confronted with streams of burning fuel. Hospital Corpsman John Bradley continued his dangerous work among the wounded, crawling through fire-swept terrain to reach Marines who had been cut down by sniper fire or shrapnel. The mountain's defenders had positioned snipers throughout the rocky terrain, marksmen who could remain hidden for hours before taking a single, carefully aimed shot. Bradley's medical bag seemed pitifully inadequate against the variety of wounds inflicted by modern warfare. As reported in post-war interviews with surviving veterans, the fighting on Mount Suribachi took on an almost medieval character. Marines used grenades like siege weapons, rolling them into cave entrances before charging forward with rifles and bayonets. Japanese defenders fought with samurai swords alongside modern weapons, creating a surreal battlefield where ancient and modern warfare merged in deadly combat. By February 23rd, after 4 days of constant fighting, the 28th Marines had fought their way to within striking distance of Suribachi's summit. The mountain's defenders had been gradually worn down by the relentless American assault, though they continued to fight with suicidal determination. Every cave had to be cleared individually, every bunker reduced by direct assault. Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, commanding the 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, organized the final assault on the summit. His Marines had suffered terrible casualties in the fighting up the mountain slopes, but they remained determined to plant the American flag on Suribachi's peak. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. Capturing the mountain would signal to every American on the island that the impossible could be achieved. At approximately 10:30 on the morning of February 23rd, a patrol led by Lieutenant Harold Schreier reached the summit of Mount Suribachi. They found a piece of Japanese pipe and raised a small American flag, creating one of the most iconic moments in Marine Corps history. The sight of the stars and stripes flying over the mountain brought cheers from Marines across the island, though the battle for Iwo Jima was far from over. While Mount Suribachi had fallen, the capture of the mountain proved to be only the beginning of the nightmare that was Iwo Jima. The northern 2/3 of the island remained in Japanese hands, and Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had prepared his most formidable defenses in the rocky highlands beyond the airfields. What American forces would encounter there would make the fighting for Suribachi seem like a mere skirmish. Major General Graves Erskine's 3rd Marine Division had been committed to the center of the American line, tasked with advancing across the island's central plateau toward the town of Motoyama. The terrain ahead appeared deceptively open, gently rolling hills covered with scrub brush and scattered rocks. However, Japanese engineers had spent months transforming this landscape into what Marines would come to call the meat grinder. The Japanese had constructed 3 successive defensive lines across the island's width, each more formidable than the last. The first line ran through Motoyama Airfield No. 1, where Kuribayashi's men had converted every building, hangar, and revetment into a fortress. Machine gun nests were positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire across the runway, while mortar teams operated from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. Colonel Howard Kenyon's 9th Marines discovered the true horror of Japanese defensive preparations when they attempted to advance beyond the first airfield. What appeared to be innocent patches of ground suddenly erupted with gunfire as concealed spider holes revealed their occupants. Japanese soldiers would emerge from these perfectly camouflaged positions, fire a few rounds, and then disappear back underground before Marines could locate and engage them. The psychological strain of fighting a nearly invisible enemy began to tell on American forces. Private First Class Jack Lucas, barely 18 years old, found himself constantly scanning the ground ahead for any sign of concealed positions. The knowledge that death could emerge from any patch of earth created a paranoia that affected even veteran Marines. Sleep became impossible as Japanese infiltrators attempted to penetrate American lines under cover of darkness. Tank support, which had proven so effective in previous Pacific campaigns, found itself severely limited by the terrain and Japanese anti-tank tactics. Sherman tanks became trapped in the soft volcanic sand or were destroyed by carefully positioned anti-tank guns, firing from concealed positions. Japanese soldiers armed with magnetic mines and satchel charges crawled through the darkness to plant explosives on American armor. Hospital corpsman pharmacists mate third class George Wallen witnessed firsthand the escalating casualties as American forces ground forward yard by bloody yard. The Japanese had positioned their medical aid stations and ammunition dumps deep underground, allowing them to maintain resistance even when their surface positions were overrun. Wounded Marines often found themselves under fire from positions they thought had been cleared hours earlier. As documented in classified military reports later declassified in the 1970s, American casualties were mounting at rates that threatened the success of the entire operation. By the end of February, more than 13,000 Marines had been killed or wounded, a casualty rate approaching 50% in some units. Medical evacuation ships operated continuously, ferrying the wounded back to bases in the Marianas and Hawaii. The second Japanese defensive line proved even more formidable than the first. Centered on a series of rocky ridges and hills with names like Hill 362 and Turkey Knob, this position had been prepared with mathematical precision. Every approach route was covered by multiple weapons, while underground tunnels allowed Japanese defenders to shift forces rapidly to threatened sectors. Marine Corsair pilots reported that their bombs and napalm seemed to have little effect on the underground positions. Japanese defenders would disappear into their tunnels during air attacks, then emerge to resume fighting once the aircraft departed. The volcanic rock proved nearly impervious to conventional explosives, requiring direct hits by the largest bombs to cause significant damage. As March began, it became clear that American estimates of Japanese strength had been wildly optimistic. Instead of the 13,000 defenders originally estimated, Kuribayashi commanded more than 21,000 troops, all committed to fighting to the death rather than surrendering. The Battle of Iwo Jima had become a test of wills between two military forces, each determined to prove their superiority through sacrifice and bloodshed. By early March 1945, the Battle of Iwo Jima had devolved into a grinding war of attrition that tested the limits of human endurance. American forces had been fighting continuously for 2 weeks, advancing yard by bloody yard against an enemy that seemed to emerge from the very rocks themselves. The psychological toll of constant combat against an invisible foe had pushed many Marines to their breaking point. Major General Keller Rocky's 5th Marine Division found themselves confronting the most formidable Japanese position yet encountered, a complex of ridges and ravines in the island's northern sector that Marines had dubbed the amphitheater. Japanese engineers had transformed this natural depression into a killing field of interconnected bunkers and firing positions, each carefully sited to provide mutual support and overlapping fields of fire. The fighting in the amphitheater took on a savage intensity that shocked even veteran Pacific warriors. Japanese defenders, following Kuribayashi's orders to kill 10 Americans before dying, fought with a fanaticism that bordered on the supernatural. They emerged from positions that had been declared cleared, attacked with bayonets and swords when their ammunition ran out, and chose death over capture with unwavering consistency. Corporal Herschel Williams of the 3rd Battalion, 21st Marines earned the Medal of Honor during 4 hours of single-handed combat against multiple Japanese positions. Armed with a flamethrower and covered by 4 riflemen, Williams systematically destroyed pillbox after pillbox, advancing alone across fire-swept terrain to bring his weapon within range of enemy positions. His actions broke open a crucial sector of Japanese defenses, though at terrible cost to his supporting Marines. The strain of continuous combat began manifesting itself in various ways throughout American forces. Combat fatigue, then called battle neurosis, affected increasing numbers of Marines who had endured weeks of constant stress and horror. The sight of friends being killed by an enemy they could rarely see, combined with the ever-present threat of death from concealed positions, created psychological pressures that military medicine was only beginning to understand. Supply operations became increasingly dangerous as Japanese infiltrators and hidden snipers targeted rear area personnel. Water, ammunition, and medical supplies had to be carried forward under constant fire, often at night to avoid the attention of Japanese observers. The volcanic ash that covered the island created clouds of choking dust that filled weapons and equipment, requiring constant maintenance under impossible conditions. According to post-war testimony from Japanese survivors, their own forces were nearing collapse by this point in the battle. Ammunition was running critically low, medical supplies were exhausted, and food had been reduced to emergency rations. However, Kuribayashi's iron discipline and the Japanese military code of death before dishonor maintained unit cohesion even under these desperate circumstances. The capture of Motoyama Airfield No. 2 required 5 days of continuous fighting, for what American planners had expected to take in a few hours. Every building, every runway, every piece of equipment had been booby-trapped or converted into a defensive position. Japanese engineers had demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in creating lethal surprises for advancing Americans, buried mines, concealed snipers, and carefully planned ambushes that turned routine advances into deadly encounters. Marine engineers worked frantically to repair captured airfields while fighting continued around them. The strategic value of Iwo Jima as an emergency landing field for damaged B-29 bombers provided crucial motivation for American forces, even as casualties mounted beyond all previous Pacific campaigns. The first emergency landing by a crippled superfortress occurred on March 4th, validating the strategic assumptions that had led to the invasion. Private First Class Franklin Earl Sigler's actions during the assault on Hill 362 exemplified the individual heroism that characterized the Iwo Jima campaign. Despite being severely wounded, Sigler continued to advance against Japanese positions, using grenades and rifle fire to clear bunkers that had pinned down his entire platoon. His sacrifice, like that of so many others, purchased a few more yards of blood-soaked volcanic rock. As March progressed, it became clear that Japanese resistance was finally weakening, though at a pace that made American commanders increasingly desperate. Each day brought new casualties that threatened to exceed the replacement capacity of American forces. The original 3-day estimate for capturing the island had stretched into weeks, with no end in sight to the slaughter. By mid-March 1945, the Battle of Iwo Jima had entered its final, most desperate phase. Japanese resistance, while weakening, remained as fanatical as ever. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had withdrawn his remaining forces into the island's northern tip, where volcanic caves and rocky crevices provided natural fortifications that seemed impregnable to conventional assault. The end came, not with dramatic breakthrough, but through the gradual reduction of isolated pockets of resistance scattered across the island's northern reaches. American forces employed flamethrowers, demolition charges, and grenades to clear Japanese positions, one by one. The fighting took on an almost personal character, as small groups of Marines confronted equally small groups of Japanese defenders in desperate close-quarters combat. Captain Robert Dunlap of the 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, led the systematic clearing of the final Japanese strongholds near Kitano Point. His men had been fighting continuously for nearly a month, and their faces bore the hollow-eyed stare of soldiers who had seen too much death. Yet they pressed forward with grim determination, understanding that each eliminated position brought them closer to the battle's end. The volcanic caves that honeycomb Iwo Jima's northern coast provided Japanese defenders with nearly impregnable positions, but also became their tombs. American demolition teams used shaped charges and flame units to seal cave entrances, trapping Japanese soldiers inside, rather than attempting costly frontal assaults. The psychological warfare was as important as the physical destruction. Surviving Japanese defenders could hear their comrades dying in sealed caves, knowing their own fate would likely be similar. On March 26th, organized Japanese resistance finally collapsed when Kuribayashi's command post was overrun by Marines of the 5th Pioneer Battalion. The Japanese general's body was never found, though American forces discovered his final radio transmission, ordering his remaining troops to fight to the death. True to his orders, scattered groups of Japanese soldiers continued to emerge from hiding places to launch suicidal attacks against American positions. The final casualty count revealed the true cost of capturing Iwo Jima. American forces had suffered more than 28,000 casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed in action. Of the Japanese garrison of approximately 21,000 men, fewer than 200 survived to be taken prisoner. The casualty rate exceeded that of any previous Pacific campaign, earning Iwo Jima its grim reputation as the costliest battle in Marine Corps history. Yet the strategic value of the island quickly became apparent. Within days of the battle's end, Army Air Force's personnel began expanding the captured airfields to accommodate increasing numbers of B-29 superfortresses. Emergency landings by damaged bombers returning from raids over Japan validated the strategic assumptions that had led to the invasion, though at a price that many questioned. As referenced in declassified strategic bombing survey documents from 1946, more than 2,400 B-29 crewmen made emergency landings on Iwo Jima during the final months of the war. Each of these airmen owed their lives to the Marines who had died capturing the island, creating a debt that could never be fully calculated or repaid. The iconic photograph of Marines raising the American flag on Mount Suribachi became, perhaps, the most famous image of World War II, symbolizing American determination and sacrifice in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Yet for the survivors of the battle, the image carried more complex meanings. Triumph mixed with grief for fallen comrades, pride tempered by the knowledge of victory's terrible cost. The lessons learned from Iwo Jima would influence American military planning for the proposed invasion of Japan itself. The fanatical resistance encountered on an 8-square-mile island suggested that conquering the Japanese home islands would require casualties on an unprecedented scale. This realization contributed to President Harry Truman's decision to use atomic weapons rather than risk the massive casualties that conventional invasion would entail. The Battle of Iwo Jima thus became more than just another Pacific campaign. It became a symbol of American courage and determination, while simultaneously demonstrating the terrible price of total war. The Sulphur Island that had seemed so insignificant on pre-war maps had become hallowed ground, purchased with the blood of young Americans who answered their country's call in its hour of greatest need. Their sacrifice ensured that Iwo Jima would be remembered not just as a military objective captured, but as a testament to the human spirit's capacity for heroism in the face of overwhelming adversity.